All right, so this video, it kind of pulls from the presentation, but isn't about the specific science fiction in the presentation, which I've already made those videos actually to pull those out and focus on them a little bit more. For this one, I want to talk about the science fiction genre, which I do talk about in the presentation, and I am pulling out one section of it. But there's something else I also want to talk about that occurred to me after the presentation. Well, after, but still. And it's NGC 3324, as I recall. I think this will just be my generic background. I may change out for other Hubble images. Sorry, my brain just switched off a little bit. But I may change out, but it's a nice image. I want to use it. Anyway, so just to quickly recap, and is kind of relevant. To me, this science fiction genre, and remember, I don't have a literature background, an English background, no. So if you ask somebody that does have that background, they'll give you a different answer potentially. I don't care. I mean, I do a little bit, but not that much. So to me, the science fiction genre is going to be, and this is not a complete definition, complete description, but it's going to be well ruled, reasonable, and explainable. So by that I mean, if something happens in a science fiction story, you should be able to explain what happened and how it happened. Now, you might be giving fiction for the answers, because, science fiction, you are going to break certain things because it serves the story, or it's an aspect of the story, of the setting. But you still need to have that explanation, even if it is fiction, you still need to have that explanation. And that all three of those go together: well ruled, reasonable, and explainable. You can explain it, the explanation has to be reasonable, and there need to be clear rules to all of this. If you can just always break the rules, then it ceases to be science fiction, would become fantasy, potentially, or just a bad story. Because if you're constantly breaking the rules, then why should anyone read it? I mean, part of how you connect with a story is its rules. Because, okay, I understand what's going on here, I can be interested, I can be invested. If the rules cease to mean anything, then it's hard to connect. Alright, so here's a graphic that modified a little bit from the presentation, but just to give an example of well-ruled, this is meant to represent the laws of physics, which in them you can maintain them, so straight line, don't do anything to them. You can bend them, which, a lot, you definitely do that in science fiction. You can also break and heal them. That and healing is very important. And as I explained in the presentation, that's part of how I distinguish science fiction from fantasy. In fantasy, you break something, you don't need to explain it. It's magic, and you're done. In science fiction, though, I do believe you need to heal that. And we don't need the graphic anymore. So, an example of that for me is with my Catherine verse, I do have the ships able to travel faster than the speed of light. I use a warp system for that, just generically a warp. Now, in order, obviously that is breaking a law of physics. You can't travel faster than the speed of light. I do give an explanation for how I'm suddenly allowed to do that. It's not necessarily that good, probably not physically accurate, but it's science fiction, that's fine. But it is still, I broke the law of physics. Okay, how do I heal? Well, here, and let me actually turn it back on. Importantly, notice I'm not healing to the broken piece. The broken piece is still broken. I'm healing around it. And that is an important distinction to me, because that's how I healed that break. Is not that, hey, this is how it works, and I could write a paper and get all the PhDs in the world for figuring that one out, and all the physics prizes. No, it's instead, okay, what are the dangers to it? How is this field created? Not mechanically, as in, writing out the formulas, but what is the system? What is the device? How does that look? How does that function? How is it powered? How does it actually build the field based on certain variables? Things like that. So, I think I at one point, I don't remember, it's been a while, but reasoned it out voltage. What did I want to go with? Voltage was the radius, would control the radius of the field. The current would control the impact of the field, so how effective it was at letting you go faster than speed of light. At this current, it only lets you get to this speed, but at this higher current, you can go to a higher speed, whereas voltage is just how large. Something like that. And I may have that reversed, but it was that kind of idea. And even then, giving that kind of relationship in the story would be that kind of healing. Because, like, oh, okay, so it connects up this way. It isn't just a magic button. Yeah, so to me, there's the healing, and also the dangers of it. Because if a warp field collapses, it could just lead to the ship being destroyed. Very catastrophically. I mean, it's like very, very bad. So I then also have systems in there to monitor if the field is weakening, is collapsing, and also what even the emergency protocols are that would go into play that would activate if that were to start happening. So it's like that is all in it. That's all part of that healing. Okay, so that's out of the presentation. I want to talk about something else that occurred to me. And it was because I was going through weeks ago now, no months, a list of movies. And one thing that occurred to me, this is a curated list of movies that are supposed to be important, significant. And what occurred to me is there was very little science fiction there, and I don't think there was any American science fiction. Like some things there that some people might label science fiction, no, it was actually fantasy. Or what some may call science fantasy. But it certainly was not just science fiction. I do think that there is an issue with some people are like, oh, that's science fiction. It's like, no, it's not. A good example would be Star Wars. That's not really science fiction. It's science fantasy. Because to use the Force is magic, but to use an example of the Force in there, Empire Strikes Back, the raising of the X-Wing. It's like, okay, in fantasy, it's the Force. Lifts it up, no problem. In science fiction, it's okay, it has been raised up. Well, that means that there's a momentum going up. We need a momentum going down that balances that out. Where is it? I mean, it's like, if Yoda's projecting this, then should be on Yoda, which means that he should be pressed into the ground with the force of the weight of the X-Wing. He doesn't become a pancake, though. So it's that is fantasy. That is just magic. And there's other elements as well, where the setting is science fiction, but it is not a science fiction story. Even then, I'm not really convinced it's all that science fiction. There's like no innovation across the movies. I mean, anyway, that's separate. But still, it's that list. Coming back to that list, very little science fiction, like no American science fiction. And it occurred to me, because it had plenty of fantasy on there, it occurred to me that there is an important distinction between fantasy and science fiction as far as how people can connect to it. A fantasy story, by its nature, cannot be real. It's fantasy, it's fantastic. So, there are no dragons in the world, essentially. Okay? They do not exist. But in science fiction, technically it can be real. And, in fact, a lot of science fiction stories seem to largely fall along into two camps. One being like the science fiction allows you to achieve new things that otherwise would be impossible. Star Trek would be an example of that, where it's just this is a possibility for us, something to uplift us as a whole. That science and technology can be wonderful, and look at these things that it can allow us to do. But also it can expose an aspect of humanity where even with this great science, even with this great technology, there's still suffering, and some of it can be the result of humanity trying to use this great and powerful technology. The other camp would be more like The Matrix or RoboCop, even the Terminator and Terminator 2, in that instead of it being just generically uplifting for humanity, it's instead humanity is suffering, and it's in part because of that science fiction. And RoboCop, I think, might be the best example of the three I mentioned. Maybe The Matrix can compete there, but no, I think RoboCop. Because what's the story of RoboCop? And by the way, I'm referring to the original. I've not seen that remake. I don't think I care to. Anyway, what is the story in there? Police officer is killed, and by the way, I will be spoiling, so sorry about that. It's a good movie, though. I do recommend. It's very bloody. But a police officer is killed. Now, this is a dystopic world, lots of crime and such, and police are being treated very poorly for various reasons. In part because there's a lot of crime and they're getting budget cutbacks, but it's also a company has taken over the police. They own the police. And so what they do then with that police officer who's been killed is they take his body, and use it as a platform for RoboCop, for this mechanized robotic officer that basically it's a cyborg, combines both the living tissue with the electronics. And the reason why they did that is because technically the brain is still functional a little bit, and it's so like muscle memory kind of thing. It seems like gut reactions and such would still be in place. But they do intentionally try to wipe the personality. They try to strip the human, the dead human technically, but they still try to strip him of his humanity to make this machine. But throughout the film, you do see some of the humanity is fighting to come back, and also it helps that at least one person there recognizes him and tries to connect with him as a human again. And ultimately, in the end, what are the final two lines of the film? What's your name, son? Murphy. I put more energy into it. I mean, the line delivery was much better than mine, but he gives his name. So it's RoboCop, Murphy is supposed to be dead. RoboCop is supposed to be the new character here, the new personality, and the technology is supposed to push Murphy out. But he answers with his name. And with a bit of a smile as well, that he is here, he is back. And so that's this other group, I feel very well captured that, for science fiction, this other group where it is, yes, the science can in fact be used to oppress you, but humanity's still coming through, still beating it in the end, at least to the degree of surviving. And I realized when that occurred to me, that may be a reason why this curated list wouldn't include much science fiction, but would include fantasy. Because fantasy, as I said, it's always fake. Science fiction, it can connect with you in a different way. Like you see a dragon, you know that's not real. You see a spaceship, and it's like, well, that might be real. You see RoboCop, and you think, oh, this is bad. Like, we're destroying the value of humans by doing this to them. But at the same time, you feel, yeah, but humanity can still survive. Humanity can still come through that. So you can connect with it. But it still lifts you up. It still gets you through there. And also, like, with The Matrix, where humanity has been turned into batteries. But in the end, there is Neo, who is able to break through that. And, in fact, is so above the Matrix that, at the end, when they're running the trace program, and it just stops, he's able to stop the program. He is that powerful over the Matrix. And by the way, I'm only referring to the original Matrix. I've seen its 2 sequels. I don't think they're any good. So it's like, no, it's just the Matrix. And I've only seen them once. I don't want to. The Matrix, though, I got it right there. I can watch it whenever I want. It is quite a good movie. But it does, again, have that element of science and technology has oppressed humanity, but we still come through. We still break through. So, yeah, I felt like sharing that because I do think that is an interesting, important distinction with science fiction, at least against fantasy. And I personally, I do consider fantasy and science fiction to be brother and sister. I mean, it's like, they are very closely related. And it is, in some ways, for me, even, it would be a fine line to separate them. Because there are definitely some, like I mentioned Star Trek earlier, with the hundreds to thousands of hours of content there between the television shows and programs. There's going to be some where it's like, yeah, that's fantasy. That's not science fiction. Where they're just trying to tell a story and they're not making sure that it's all got the clear rules and that it all has the explainability and reasonability. That's fine. I mean, you're going to be a little wishy-washy with some of it, especially when you have to produce that much content. But it still is that is largely science fiction. But it is part of the reason why I do consider them so close to each other. Another example that would be, again, like Star Trek, where it's like this is just generically meant to uplift, see what is possible with technology. And still, humanity has to be there. It's humanity being lifted up, but it can still be humanity making mistakes. Stargate SG-1, Atlantis, and so on. That would be another example of that. And yeah, I don't know. I want to talk about that because I think that is an interesting revelation to have, because I mean, fantasy stories, there are plenty that I love a lot, but is still if I'm reading those or if I'm watching those, I would be learning lessons about morality, because, as I said, there are no dragons. But in science fiction, you can also learn those, and you can also look at it and be like, maybe one day. I just think that that's kind of worth talking about, kind of worth sharing that perspective on. All right, I've certainly talked enough, and yeah, as I said, I just wanted to share that one. That's why I wanted to make sure I made this video. All right, see you next time.